there, it's Paulie here with Mr. Snoots, yay! Ooh, and plum wine. So, viewer requests. You made me do it. Yes, people were talking about complex games of the 70s and 80s. One of the most complex was Aftermath. And Aftermath does have a place in my heart because a lot of it was written and set in Australia. So, Aftermath it is. We have played long and joyous campaigns of this, by the way, despite its complexity. Yay! So, look, Aftermath. So, one of my favourite games of all time is Bushido. Bushido was done by Bob Charette and Paul Hume. This same design team did a post-apocalyptic game called Aftermath. Now, we had Gamma World at the time that this came out. Gamma World is kind of crazy mutants, mutant plants, science fiction tech and weirdness. And is jolly good fun and remains one of my favourite games. Aftermath was trying to be more gritty. It's going to be essentially the modern world which has been overcome by some sort of disasters, and this is the world of the aftermath. Thus the name. It could be relatively swiftly after the aftermath, it could be hundreds of years. I'll talk about setting in a bit. So, with all that said and done, Aftermath decided that it wanted to set up something that could model modern firearms and modern protective gear, maybe slightly futuristic, and do it well. So that was what it decided to do, and keep the crazy mutations and so on out of it. And now we drink because it does get crazy. Because Aftermath came from that weird period in the 80s where someone decided more was better. More details, more rules. Every single tiny extra bit of hyper definition that the rules can give you makes for a better game. And that's what scars this game. However, you can kind of battle past that, and you can get a good game out of Aftermath. We played it for many years, and you can still get a great game out of Aftermath. I re-looked at it because I had memories of how complex it was. However, as you carved through it, it's actually simple. They just take a very long-winded approach to kind of reach that simplicity. I'll kind of show you what I mean. So, first off, Aftermath has a series of... You will be human. You might be mutant depending on the setting. We'll talk about the setting, as I said, in a minute. You'll be rolling on a chart, percentile dice on a chart, to get a value for your basic characteristics. These characteristics have two sets of things that you are recording from them. One is a numerical value, and one is a dice that is associated with that characteristic value, because sometimes the dice comes in. So, not too strenuous a system. There are a series of secondary characteristics that you can roll. You do not have to. You can do a basic game without. But there are more defined characteristics that you can do as well. So again, it had one of those... It came from an era where people decided, I don't need dexterity, I want to break it up into, agility, which is going to be like tightrope walking, diving and rolling and that sort of stuff, and manual dexterity, and maybe hand-eye coordination, which is what I'm going to... You can split it up if you wish, but you don't have to, I notice. There are some figured characteristics for things like, essentially, your endurance, your hit points, and so on, which is going to come off your... or your body value, which is going to come off your constitution and your strength and your size, and so on. So, some calculated characteristics. Again, not too big an ask. The baffling thing about this game is that everything is expressed as numbers between 1 and 100. There's a lot of percentile generation and so on. But when it comes into the actual mechanics of the game system, this is broken down into D20 rolls. So you have to divide the percentage values by 5 to come up with values that will be rolled on a D20. getting that number or less. So it's a D20 roll low system. So if I come out of this whole process and I have a 60% skill in guns, that would have to be divided by 5, 12, and I am rolling a D20 looking for a 12 or less to hit with the required gun. So again, simple enough, but why not keep it percentile? I'm not quite sure. There is a jump there that was not. This trip was unnecessary. This could have been kept as a percentile system. However, D20 is kind of neat. It's clean. It's lending itself to fairly simple plus and minuses to dice rolls and so on. Plus 1, 2, 3 on a D20 is easy. So all right. But there is just that one little mathematical jump. So it's a D20 roll low system. As part of the generation system, you will be given a slew of skills that you can learn. As I said, these are all expressed D20 wise. However, there's a slew of just, pardon my French, bugfuck crazy skills there that I'm not sure why. Because remember, it's from that completest era of role-playing game design. So there are skills there in deploying off helicopters. It's the aftermath. All the buildings have fallen over sideways, and the city is currently being grazed over by mutant cattle with glowing green eyes. How many helicopters do you think I'm landing out of? Yeah, likewise, parachute training and amphibious landing skills and these sorts of things. It's like, all right, for a total completist, fine, but I really think this trip was unnecessary. So there is a huge slew of skills there which are not going to be touched. So, where this game excelled, and I use that semi-ironically, is in its combat system, because this was done by guys who wanted to be as gun nutty as the craziest gun nuts in gun nut land. So, given its era, the 80s, it has every single smegging firearm devised by man up to that stage. So no, you won't find P90s or whatever in there, but anything from the 80s backwards. Done in intense, incredible detail. The rounds all do damage, which is absolutely infinitesimally there's a whole page of these. This is the 38 special as opposed to the 9mm, as opposed to the .25 short to the .22 long to the .22 magnum. This is the such and such reload to the so and so. Yeah, it's all in there. There must be 100 or more different rounds in there. But this is expressed as a base damage that they do. When you roll to hit someone, you roll, and the better the roll, the more of a multiplier of that base damage it does. This comes off the target's body. If the body drops too low, the person basically ends up taking a dirt nap. Armour subtracts from the damage. So fairly simple, you would think. Well, not quite. It is, to hit is split up. For firearms, there are different range bands, and it's split up into things like pistols, carbines, assault rifles, etc. They get different bonuses to hit at different ranges. Now the thing gets a little bit crazy in that one of the characteristics that you have figured early on is your number of actions per turn. So you can fire multiple times during a turn. An action is something like firing, moving, taking aim, reloading, etc. So you might end up, the actual characteristic chart excites you for a moment by its possibilities because it goes way up there, but you realize that most human beings are going to be concentrated way down in the lower end of this, so you might get 1, 2 or maybe 3 actions a turn. So you could aim, shoot and reload, or you could shoot. Reload. Wait, why would you do that? I don't know. Actually, there are some things that require multiple reloads, like muskets and so on. You have to do multiple reload actions. There is an initiative system, however, it doesn't seem to split actions up evenly through a turn. So if it is your turn in the initiative and you have 3 actions, you roll 3 actions. So for the power players amongst us, number of actions per turn might be important if you're planning on gunning a whole bunch of people down. Where things got funny was the armor and the hit locations. So when you hit someone, you roll percentile dice, and they have a figure. Now, I loved the hit location thing in RuneQuest. That was an early game, and it was fantastic because it was way more visceral. It's like ding, ding, ding. Oh, I've hit this guy in the chest. Oh, I've hit him in the right arm. The error that RuneQuest made, and it's a fundamental one, is that melee hits are random. They are not. I am an expert in sword, spear, and knife fencing, and I assure you I hit you exactly where I intend to. Sometimes if you've managed to get an arm across in a parry, it might skip up over your armour and into your throat rather than, you know, into the heart where I was aiming, but that's about it. If I'm attacking you with a bayonet, I'm never going to hit you in the foot. I'm never going to hit you in the knee. That's just not a thing. But these guys took randomness, of course. Now they've split the human body up into, I think, 30 different hit locations. So the hand is one, the wrist is one, the forearm is one, the elbow is one, this part of your arm is one, your shoulder is one, etc. Now, I have to say, and this goes on like head and throat and everything, the groin is one. As I said, you rolled percentile dice. The funny thing is the groin, everything kind of split up evenly, but you realize there's 30 hit locations, but you're rolling on percentile dice. So the extra percentile, they ended up with like a couple of percentile left over. For some reason, they went into the groin. So statistically, if you can only armor one part of your area, always armor your groin, because statistically there's like a 1 or 2% greater chance that over any other hit location would be hit. So yes, always slip a house brick into your jocks. But conceptually, I always found this a bit weird because, yes, this is a big bullet or a small bullet or whatever, diddly-diddly-dee. However, if this thing hits you exactly in the elbow, it's like, I almost don't need a damage system. It's like, ah, splinters of bone in that armor is never going to be used again. But, okay. Kind of wackly, the arm damage and the limb damage and so on, it can only do a certain percentage of your body. That's all that really counts. You can't kill someone by shooting them in the arm, unless they were way down on hit points anyway, I guess. So there's a maximum of the person's body they can take out, and it can make that limb useless. Fair enough, but so there wasn't that much reason to make your hand different from your wrist, different from your forearm, different to your elbow, because, you know, that same rule applies. The thing that's different is the armor. So if you've got like, let's say you've got a ballistic vest on, and it's got shoulder pauldrons, and you've got this on over a suit of chainmail, and you're wearing leather gloves, yeah, and the bullet hits you in the hand, your armor is leather gloves. So you are kind of as vulnerable as your weakest armor, which did lead to people making some extraordinary things. There is a massive list of armor values for different types of armor that are made. They get a little bit crazy. Again, remember, this was from the period where more detail was for some reason seen as better. So they start defining things. Is it rigid armor? Is it flexible armor? Is it semi-rigid armor? Because this counted towards encumbrance. Wearing stiff things was more encumbering than wearing flexible things. And again, that's not too much of an ask. You can see where they were going with it. It's just, you know, each one's a little tiny extra layer of complexity that maybe if you were running it these days, you wouldn't want. And the other thing is, since it's aftermath, and it is the aftermath of, you know, the devastation, you probably aren't so resource rich that this matters. You're not going to be wearing enough armor really to totally weigh you down, you know, because all you're finding is bits and pieces in the ruins or whatever you can make from bits of metal. You know, you're not going to be wearing 5 bulletproof suits over each other and 2 motorcycle helmets. You know, it's like, that's not going to happen. But you can wear different layers of armor over each other. There's a little thing saying, you know, if you did want to wear like a chainmail suit and put a ballistic vest over it, fine. It's all encumbrance. So a relatively simple game there actually, but to get to that simple heart, it is buried under a mass of detail which you can kind of ignore just to get to the heart of it. It's a d20, roll low. I've got skills which are going to give me those values. I've got body points, which are my hit points. I've got armour on my body. I've got the damage that my weapons do. Melee weapons and muscle-powered missile weapons like bows and thrown spears and so on. Instead of having a base damage generated by the thing like the guns do, your base damage comes off a factor for the weapon and your strength. And that's where that dice comes from the characteristics. So if I have a strength of 40 and it says that's a d10, good. My roll to damage you is a d10 times a multiplier for the weapon. What am I using? A sword. What's the multiplier on the sword? 2. All right, a d10 times 2 is the damage I'm doing. Fair enough. Now, an interesting other layer to this is the setting guidelines. So what they've done is they have then talked about the apocalypse. So it guides you into how to make choices for your world. How are you running this? What is this world to you? So it gives you some questions. At what state and stage was the world in when things happened? Then it talks about apocalypses. Is there a big event that takes people out, or is it more gradual? If there's a big event that takes out, there's also like, secondary and tertiary kill. So like if the bomb goes off and lots of people are killed in the cities, but your secondary kills are fallout and your tertiary kill is starvation and so on, which can take place amongst the survivors for a decade or more later. So essentially, plan how your world ended, and then they've got a big list of different choices for how this could go. And they have illustrated this with like Martian tripods and so on. So they go through, they give you a hint. This could be what everyone just expects. Straight up, there was a nuclear war. It was the 80s, we were expecting it at any instant. I carried a bailout bag everywhere I went, and so did most of my friends at university. That was the era, man. We were whisker off world incineration. But it could be alien invasion or Martian invasion. And there's been some good TV shows about that where aliens turned up and nuked cities and done things. Check some of those out. But it could be other things. It could be a plague. It could be a meteor strike. Or it could be some strange effect has changed the world. What if? And it runs you through many, many, many different what ifs so that you can make something that will actually surprise your characters. Now, I played a wonderful campaign of this, and it was really interesting. Toxic Gamer, of whom I've spoken, was playing with us. Now, we were playing this and we were told we had grown up around a thing called the City of Iron Towers, which had these giant kind of metal columns, but there was lots of extraneous metal in the area. Lots of what we figured out later on were things like train tracks and so on, which were being mined for metal for our tribe. So we were relatively wealthy in metal. And we would trade that to people who had other stuff that we needed. But there were the ruins far, far off, which were, you were told, and the wise elders told you that once long ago there were the ancients who had magical powers, and they could do amazing things. They could heal people, they could fly through the skies, they could do all these magical things. And our friend Toxic Gamer is just like, yeah, whatever, just, roll it on, come on, pal, come on. Because, yeah. He was just presuming they were talking about our technology, etc. So when we decided we will go and we will investigate this city, for one thing, it finally clicked. At that stage, I was living in Melbourne, in Australia, as you can tell by the accent. But the City of Iron Towers, that was an area called Altona, which is a industrial suburb far outside of Melbourne, which has refineries. Oh, we were living in the old refineries, and it's rail yards and everything that we're mining. So the great and mighty ruins out there, that was Melbourne. Excuse me. So Melbourne has an underground rail system, which is what these mysterious tunnels were in that these strange creatures were living in. But when we got in there, it didn't seem bombed out, but it was just weird because physical laws were changed in some areas. And there was we found a whole skyscraper that was lying on its side. But when you went inside it, down was towards the floor of the skyscraper. So you're looking out the window and the world's tilted. And this drove Toxic Gamer completely mad. He was absolutely ropeable because he wanted a simple, hey, the bomb hit thing. But somehow this thing has been told about how the ancients had magical power seemed to be what was going on. As it turned out, what the umpire had done for this one is there had been an effect had been spread, and this is the 80s, so this guy was actually doing quite well as far as looking to the future. The equivalent of like a Hadron Collider or something had been developed, and someone had basically fractured reality so that magical powers began to leak out into the general population. And people began to have magical powers, and this spread. But the thing was that giving people all of these powers eventually led to the destruction of all civilization, because at first it was miraculous. Then people used it to carry out their petty revenge or just screw with these things, and then eventually those who could do it really well all basically flung stuff at each other and destroyed civilization. And eventually the Helion Colliders went up with it and they were gone. So those powers are largely gone, but some of their effects still lingered. So it was a magical disaster that it hit a normal technological world. So, you know, that was an interesting, and that was that umpire's twist. That's what he made for his world. And so, yeah, that was a really interesting idea. So you can do whatever you want. You could do the aftermath of a Martian invasion. A Martian invasion. You could do a weird plague. You could do the Andromeda Man. You could do all sorts of interesting ideas. You know, the sky's the limit. It doesn't have to be just a straight up, you know, bomb wipes out civilization. But that's actually what these rules are really good at. It took you through a huge number of different possibilities and showed you how to make them, and then talked about what the repercussions would be for the world that you're making for people to play in. Then it adds in some extra rules once it's walked you through that. So if you have something with some sort of mutations or something have happened, here's rules for running mutants. Here's rules for running, in the spirit of the game, quite realistic mutants. You know, what might have happened. Some of this stuff isn't pretty. Or here's the more fantastical end of it if you want things that have gone a bit crazy. And if you want things where there are lingering magic powers or something that come off your setting, that's kind of up to you. But at this stage of your design journey, you've seen the characteristics, you've seen how skills and combat and everything works. So, you know, you can fit in things if there are some lingering strange magical powers or something like that. The rules bring in things like mounted combat, vehicle combat in case you've got vehicles. It brings in a huge equipment list of different sorts of vehicles and so on. What might be needed to keep them running in this kind of era. It brings in some science fiction stuff. It then brings in huge lists of different things like high-tech armors and so on that might be lying around if you had it in a setting that had stuff that was a bit beyond our own. So it gives you as many setting options as possible, and that was the strength of the game. Aftermath. Not a setting, a toolbox for creating a setting, and a toolbox for creating a setting that definitely had that very gun nut focused thing. So what weapon you were firing was going to be kind of important, and what armor you're wearing is going to be important. And so, is it a good game? Well, look, we played it quite happily for a long time, and it got fairly funny. So there were some funny aspects to it, let me say. So something like shields. There's a huge set of charts where they're very worried about what happens if you've got a shield and you're fired at by a rifle or something, because what if the rifle just goes through the shield? You could have waved a hand and just said, oh, look, it's either primitive materials, in which case a bullet's going to sail right through it, or it's, you know, high-tech stuff and maybe it won't. But no. In the spirit of the game, more detail is better. So there is literally a couple of pages for shields and what it's made out of and how thick it is. So is it plywood? Is it hardwood? Is it softwood? Is it hide? How thick a hide? How thick is the plywood? Is the plywood faced with anything? Is it faced with leather? Is it faced with rawhide? Is it faced with steel? Is it faced with copper? You know, and this will give you the overall cover value, which will tell you how much that would subtract from a bullet that hits your shield. Well, thank you. Yes, I now know in great detail whether that bullet can get through my shield. Was a strip necessary? I don't know, maybe. So that spirit underlies a lot of it. But it is actually a playable game because at its heart it is a D20 game, roll low for success. The more difficult something is, the higher its difficulty. You know, it's subtracting from the number you've got to roll, which it just gives you straight subtractions, easy enough. And if you roll well, you get extra successes, which will do extra multiples of damage or extra layers of success to the use of a skill. You've got a fairly simple body system. As you take injuries, it begins to lower your ability to do things. So if your body falls to a certain percentage of your points, you get a subtraction on all of your skill rolls. If your body falls to its last little section, you fall unconscious, and that sort of thing. I always liked games that had sort of a hit location system as you're putting armor on when they were combat-y, because it was kind of interesting because you got a bit of a mental image of what your character looked like. It's like, okay, so I've got these resources and okay, so I've found some kind of cool high-tech kind of military helmet which I've got on. Ooh, which has these magic things which when I pull them down over my eyes I can see in the dark. I've got a pair of leather greaves and some leather van braces from somewhere, and I've actually got a piece of body armor, and what I've done is I've looked at their chart on stuff, and so this is leather, but it's got, what I've done is I've put a series of different high-tech ceramic tiles I found, and I've used that as a scale armor, so I have kind of ceramic scale armor. So yeah, you've got a kind of a look and a feel of your character. You get quite innovative about, making armor out of bits of cool rubble and so on. It had all of that. What it doesn't have is a vast bestiary of strange, crazy mutant creatures that fire laser beams out of their eyes and teleport. It's not that game. But if you liked things like Andre Norton's Starman's Son, which is one of the great classics of post-apocalypse literature, then yeah, you can have the terrible rat creatures that live in the ruins. It's got bestiaries of these kinds of things in there, and so it's got a sort of a grittier edge. So less silly, more gritty. The guns as well. It's not full of black ray pistols and stun guns. It's full of, M16s and Heckler & Koch submachine guns and, Smith & Wesson 44s and these sorts of things. So, it's a bit more kind of visceral in that way. Is it playable in this day and age? It is, but you have to read kind of through the first layer where they tend to slow you down in detail a bit. Read into the system, just realise that it's actually pretty bloody simple at its core. They just kind of threw a bunch of, here's 1,000 skills for how to basically, disembark off a hovercraft, which you don't need. There's a core set of skills on, okay, I've got first aid, I can fire a crossbow, I'm quite good at scouting, and I'm a good cook, and I play the mouth organ. I don't know, it's like, that's my actual skill list. So yeah, the extraneous information in it actually makes it a little bit hard to penetrate the essential goodness within. It is a thoroughly playable game. So I actually, I kind of owe it an apology. I had it stored in memory as being too difficult to play. I'd put it in the same mental box as I put Space Opera. Space Opera is too bloody difficult to play. Aftermath, my honest opinion, and the honest opinion of a very honest elephant, and of his horseshoe crab buddy, is that this is a playable game. It's got good bones. Like a lot of Hume and Charrette's work, I think this was foundation material for our hobby. I think its influence actually does echo through a lot of games. You'll even see it now in things like Twilight 2000 and so on. That's just come out in a new version from Freya Legan. You can see the influence of this game, and I can see its influence in a lot of different game systems. And there's a negative influence as well, because this was the height, the absolute height of kind of game design where too much extraneous information was thrown at the reader. This is actually way more succinct and clear than something like some of the Iron Crown Enterprises material, which did also give you a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's 100% playable. You have to just kind of literally skim the fat off the top and find the meaty goodness beneath. A good game. Roll d20, get low, lots of detail on equipment, and lots of stuff to turn this into sort of like a tabletop thing played on squares. For those of you 5th edition D&D players who are obsessed with that, these guys beat you by 40 years. That was how you could play this game. I had a lot of really good campaigns with this and would be willing to run it again. There were a ton of kind of cool adventures written for this, and many of them are bafflingly set in like the ruins of Sydney and things like that. So Australian players actually kind of loved this because it was the only thing that had any touch of Australia in it. And coming from Melbourne at the time, the idea of nuking out Sydney was always there in our heart because, we hate the place. And now we live in West Australia. You can just soar off the east coast and just let it float out to sea. We don't need it. A good game. Worth taking a look at. Again, you can find it. FGU, Fantasy Game Unlimited, still publish this. It's still there available in PDF. You can still get this. I'll do a double check, but I think it's available on drive-through as well. It's really worthwhile having in your collection if you're a collector. If you are a game designer, it is really worth having this one to read through and look at the choices they made and how they made it. And ask yourselves how they reached those decisions and whether those decisions were necessary. Some modern games have delved too far into sophistication. It's leading to gaming the system, where I can do set moves. So I'm going to do this particular type of move, which sets him up for his set move, which will give them a boat. I'm playing a game. This thing was far more visceral. I have this weapon which can plow through this much armour, but it's slow shooting and I've only got 4 bullets. This was more visceral. Like I said, there was a lot of excitement, I think, in the game designers' minds of trying to be as complete as possible. They did that, but in many ways it's what shone through in this game beyond that completionism that they wanted to do, that really gives this game the structure that allows it to be playable 40 years later. Give it a go. Have a look. It's fun. It is actually fun to play. So anyway, I will see you guys in the funny paper sometime. See you around the game table. Until then, bye-bye. Whee! You want to push a button? He wants to push a button. Yay!